This is starting to feel like a funeral for this show, for a season that, after all, ended up, the word of the day, irreverent, and not meaning anything. The weird, ugly duckling, the odd one out. Let me tell you the story about the ugly barnacle. Once upon a time, there was a barnacle so ugly that everyone died. The end. The U.S.S. Dingwall has arrived at the microplanet, curiously full of space cows that we need to milk. We've sent down a shuttle with a modified tractor beam to act as a milking device. What happened to that cow there? That cow hasn't been milked in so long. The force of the milk explosion has altered the microplanet's orbit. This is episode 8 of the final season of Lower Decks. And you wouldn't really think it, because it's not that climactic. It's not that dramatic. It's not that interesting. Actually, it's extremely irreverent. We're not really worried about the overarching plot behind this season. We're worried about getting into the weeds about what we do every day. Actually, this whole season, this whole show actually, was inspired by an episode of TNG called Lower Decks, where we wondered, what were the people who weren't on the bridge? What were they doing? Now this one's called Upper Decks, and we're wondering, what are the people who aren't on the lower decks doing? That being the command crew. I was excited when I saw the reveal of this episode's title, Upper Decks. I knew exactly what it was going to be about. I said irreverent? Yeah. What's this episode about? I'm not sure. One would imagine that the adventures of the lower deckers would be irreverent, pointless, meaningless, meandering as a matter of course. You wouldn't really necessarily expect it of the upper deckers. Although this is the Cerritos. And as we all know, things happen a little bit different on the Cerritos. And they happen a little bit different in this episode. I can see, in my mind's eye, another controversial episode. Another episode that's just going to, divide people. Such as the story of this season overall. This season has a really good episode here, a really good episode there, and then a lot of episodes that are just kind of meandering. In fact, if I were to venture a guess, I would say this episode and a few past episodes from this season were maybe sitting in the maybe bin in terms of scripts for the last 5 seasons, where they just kind of shuffle it around, weren't sure how to use it. We'll save it for a rainy day. Well, the rainy day has come, and it's Upper Decks. So what's really happening in Upper Decks? The Cerritos, not dealing with dimensional fissures like we were hoping by the time we got to the end of the season, and they had a background arc. We hope to be kind of starting to ramp that up now. We got only 2 episodes left to do it. We're not doing that. We're wrangling some space cows, as Ransom calls them, but they're actually called Bughoon. A Starfleet, what do you call them? Ecologists, something like that. People who study animals. You know the kind. Has aboard the Cerritos and is here to investigate the Bughoons. They're these, I don't want to call them a tardigrade, wink wink, but they're a big kind of bear-like creature that seems to be feasting on some type of rock mass floating around the Cerritos. It's all very beautiful. It's all very interesting, and I could look at it for the rest of my life and be happy. But we're not happy with that. We have to bring them aboard. Our Starfleet ecologist arrives in our shuttle bay, and we're, it looks like other lower deckers, who are having a real time of it, by the way, are trying to tractor beam in with a hand tractor beam or something like that, or repel it away. I don't know what they were doing. A giant rock to try to maybe bait the Bughoon in. Accidentally, the rock goes through the force field. The force field couldn't detect that the speed of that rock was dangerous. It just goes through the force field. I thought the computer would detect the speed of that and kind of stop it from coming in, but that's not what happens. The rock comes through the force field and straight up almost kills everybody. You'll note about this episode that what goes on in the shuttle bay is dangerous enough that it looks like we could have gotten a lot of people killed. And it was a little bit worrisome from Ransom and co., who are on scene, that they allowed this to happen. The Bughoon follows the rock in. Yay, we got the Bughoon. One problem. The Bughoon turns invisible. And it rolls up. And it's rolling around the shuttle bay without any regard for who it's hitting or what it's hitting, and wreaking absolute havoc. Whereupon Ransom decides now is the time for a story about a beach, Now's the time for a story about working out. Like I said, irreverent. What does it mean? What's it about? You're riding a line here. If your episode is going to be intentionally pointless, like I said, it's got to be really funny. And this episode, I don't know if this is it. I don't know if this is it right now. But anyway, dangerously, the Bughoon almost kills everybody. That's your A plot. What you'll notice about this episode is that it has not an A plot, not a B plot, but like A, B, C, D, E, F plot, and they're very, very tiny. For example, our intro scene for this episode has our lower deckers carving pumpkins, and it's not Halloween. What is it with this season and riding the line between not having a Halloween episode and having a Halloween episode? What's going on? We had an episode that aired on Halloween. It was decidedly not about Halloween, but we had 2 other episodes now that referenced Halloween. I don't know what it means. Maybe we're going to have a Christmas episode. After all, there's an episode of this thing coming up very close to that. Leave it to them to have the next episode be a Christmas episode and the next one not. I have no idea. It's lower decks. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Our lower deckers are carving pumpkins. Ransom is almost getting everybody killed in the shuttle bay after trying to get this Bughoon creature, after all, being the central point of this plot. That's why we're here, the Cerritos, to capture these Bughoons so our ecologists could study them. Although our command crew was in a meeting earlier where we learned that Burns got some kind of virus that reminded me a lot of this thing that happened in TNG, but I won't get into it. I'm sure you know what it is if you've seen TNG, that caused Burns to evolve/devolve into a cave woman, which ended up delivering the funniest line, I think, of this whole episode. Burns was transformed into a primitive yet futuristic person who was psychic but was also afraid of open flame. And Shaxs says to Tana, "Well, how did you get her to calm down?" "Easy, I just imagined a candle." It got me laughing. I'd be lying if I said this episode wasn't fun. That would be an absolute lie if I said it wasn't having fun. So we got that. We're crossing the fun line. We're getting over the fun hurdle for this episode of Lower Decks. So that's something. But we're all going off on our own adventures. Upper Decks, after all. What's Carol Freeman doing, the captain? Carol's walking around with, Stevens, looking at her roster for the day of things to do. And there's holodeck meetings. There's we have to go to Burns' sousaphone recital, right? We have to go watch someone be born somewhere, and there's a balloon in the what I assume is hospital area / medbay that just says it's a life form. I kind of want one, just as I want Burns to stay in cave woman form. Wouldn't that be fun? I'm so apt to say that, right? Jack turns into a Borg in Picard Season 3, spoilers, and I say, "Can we keep him?" And now Burns is a cave woman. Can we keep her? I like these weird transformations. Wouldn't that be cool if we had like a caveman character in Star Trek? I don't know what that means or what it entails or how we achieve it, but it's something. Maybe we could do it. I don't know. So Carol Freeman is very busy, as is Billups. Billups, down in engineering, has a plot that, from what I can tell, has, no bearing on anything else. And it's not that funny, which is kind of sad. If you can watch this episode and tell me how that engineering plotline with Billups ties into everything else, I'd love to hear it, but I couldn't quite see how it helps to resolve the overall plot, and you'll see what I mean. Some retrofitted plasma conduits have overheated, and now Billups and some ensign have to go up using a fun-looking kind of a grappling hook around a lanyard on their body to kind of fly up and then go ting-ting-ting on some pipes to get them to turn from red to green again. Red bad, green good, or I think blue at the end, I'm not sure. They are plasma conduits after all, and blue means very, very hot. We've retrofitted these things. One of these things is retrofitted with binary technology, where if there's an emergency, it seems to summon an AI defense golem. And I didn't know I needed this, but what appears to be the master system display behind Billups actually forms into a monster that comes out of the Elcar's display. Like we got an Elcar's creature. I didn't know I needed it, but now that I see it, it's really, really cool. We all love Elcars. It's timeless. but can we have an Elcar's monster? Hey, maybe one day we're going to have an Elcar's character. I don't know how that would make sense, but we could have a holographic character whose skin is Elcar's. Can you imagine that? Only in Lower Decks, except not. This is the final season. Oops. All these crazy ideas would have worked in Lower Decks, but sadly, it's over. I do say sadly. That's a good sign. That must mean I liked it. Hopefully you liked it. This is starting to feel like a funeral for this show, for a season that, after all, ended up the word of the day, irreverent, and not meaning anything. The weird, ugly duckling, the odd one out. Let me tell you the story about the ugly barnacle. Once upon a time, there was a barnacle so ugly that everyone died. The end. Feel better? Billups ends up fixing this problem, but ends up inside of a tube. All engineers want to die in a tube. If you break this tube, the coolant will come out. He's just trying to die like Spock in Star Trek 2, and this ensign won't have it, and takes the axe to this tube, and Billups says, "That's only for emergencies." "What's your idea of an emergency?" And they break him out of the tube, and they end up saving the day. The whole thing is pointless and has a flair for the dramatic, and I think Billups is probably just playing this up for fun. I have this strange sensation that there was no real emergency here, and Billups was just bored. Your theories are welcome, because at the very end, a cadet comes up and basically asks the same question. "I saw a strange light above the door, and we should go fix it." And then Billups smiles and says, "Let's do this." I have a feeling that Billups is setting these things up to create, false traps for ensigns and cadets, just so that he can have some fun for once, because maybe not a lot happens on the Cerritos. Not that much happens to Billups, regardless. He's one of the more boring characters in Star Trek Lower Decks, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't like him. Meanwhile, Dr. T'Ana, her plot line is about pain management. People are complaining. The meeting we had at the beginning of this episode expounded upon this. Dr. T'Ana has her patients complaining about pain management. We're not getting enough pain management. What's the problem? Sick people come in, healthy people go out. What's the difference? And then she points to the screen, and it says, like, point to the one you're feeling, and it's like a happy face, feel good. And then it's feel good and other. It's not pain, it's other. There's a lot of little funny details in this that are in the background and not really at the forefront, and we waste a lot of time with Dr. T'Ana's plot here, putting her through the ringer right now. Like, in order for Dr. T'Ana to appreciate the pain that her patients are feeling, she has to experience pain herself. I'm not exactly following the train of logic on that, but the rest of the episode just involves another assistant in the medical area just essentially torturing Dr. T'Ana, and it's not funny. It's not. Dr. T'Ana's plotline was funny at the beginning and then just went straight downhill. It's funny early. Billups isn't funny at all. And Shaxs, it's interesting and visually, there's a visual splendor to it that runs through this whole season, actually. A lot of these episodes in this season are visually beautiful, but not in the ship sense. I can appreciate the visual beauty of what they're showing without being about ships. I love ships, and I'm disappointed that I'm not getting a lot of it, but I can appreciate the visual ideas going on here. Shaxs, you see, asked to be dismissed immediately from the meeting earlier on because he was having a flashback to his former self. We didn't get the weird Black Pyramid thing coming back that he was talking about in earlier seasons. Maybe that plays in the next 2 episodes. Who knows? But he sees his past self with a snake coming out of his mouth in the middle of this meeting, and he has to leave immediately. He has to go meditate, and he has to go do a bunch of Bajoran stuff. You know it's some random Star Trek alien race when they light candles, by the way. Very original. Forgive me if I don't understand all these different Bajoran things. I was only kind of half paying attention in Deep Space Nine to the Bajoran plot. Sorry. I know that's kind of what it was about, but it appears that he is possessed by, I don't know, a paw wraith, an evil version of himself, his repressed rage from the occupation. His mind goes back to the Battle of Tempasa, which looks freaking awesome. Oh my gosh, imagine if we had a whole episode with Shaxs this season that was a flashback. The whole thing was just him in some battle on Bajor or what have you. It would be so cool, but that's not what we got. It looked really cool from what we saw of it here, and the Cardassians appeared. Now, whether this really happened or is a figment in his mind, I'm not sure, the Cardassians placed a bomb on what appeared to be some kind of Bajoran ritual box or artifact. I'm not sure. It blew up. Maybe this released a paw wraith. I don't know. Go watch Deep Space Nine. I'm not sure how this all works out. I'm just from Starfleet. I don't know how these wormhole ghost things work. I don't know. But anyway, suffice to say, he seems to be like he's possessed by one. There's an evil version of himself in the back of his mind, his past self, and also a ethereal form of himself that he can summon to fight this evil version of himself. So imagine that age-old idea of the angel and the devil on either shoulder, right? Now imagine them fighting each other while Shaxs meditates, and that's how he conquers his inner demons, maybe literally in this sense, I don't know. And it's all very interesting. It's all very visually compelling. The lighting, again, is beautiful. The lighting is really on point for this entire season. This ends up with this does end up tying into the final plot arc of this specific episode. You see, one thing we were discussing at the beginning of this episode in our bridge crew meeting was that there's increased chatter from the Clickets. Not Klingons, not Klingots, Clickets. And they're like a gigantic... What do you think they're going to be like? Probably a bug, something called a Clicket. Yeah, bug. And they essentially want these Bughoon. We find out later that the Starfleet ecologist, that Ransom ended up accidentally tearing his face off. Yeah, Ransom didn't know that this ecologist was a secret Clicket. Ransom just fell asleep in the shuttle bay, allowed things to almost come to an incident within the ship, an incident. You do not want to hear the word incident, and Ransom basically almost causes one. But luck would have it that this Starfleet ecologist was actually a secret Bughoon. A piece of his face comes off. You're coming apart, ecologist guy. Do you want to go to the doctor? And then, no, his bodysuit comes off. And you're not from Starfleet at all. No, he's a Clicket. You can't try to take over the Cerritos with one guy. No, we don't want the Cerritos. We want the Bughoon to harvest their cloaking organs and then maybe eat them. Okay. On first watch, I didn't really notice a problem here, but on second watch, I couldn't help but wonder, why is the Cerritos involved? They just seem like wild animals, these Bughoon. Is there a plot line in here about why they needed to wait for the Cerritos? Why are they involved? Why couldn't they just poach the Bughoon when the Cerritos left? Does anybody know? There's an interesting episode in here. It's hidden away, buried under a lot of nonsense, and unfortunately it doesn't really come to the forefront. Clickets, an alien race, poaching Bughoon to steal their organs to figure out how they're cloaking. And then the Cerritos actually has to take an actual ecologist there to figure out how to save the Bughoon from the poachers. There's a pretty good episode in there, but sadly that's not it. And I don't know why the Clickets have to get on board the Cerritos to get the Bughoon. I don't really quite understand it. Maybe they're just dumb. Anyway, as was discussed before, the Clickets do not like being complimented. It's kind of like a reverse Tellarite. Like a Tellarite like it when you're rude to them. And the Clickets hate it when you're nice to them, right? So it turns out that the key to beating them was being overly nice to them. Reminds me a lot of, what was it, the Rongovians or Roscovians or something from Star Trek Strange New Worlds that had an outsized importance placed on honesty. Do you remember that? And it turned out our knowledge of, we'll be nice and say like interspecies politicking is how we save the day. And Carol realizes, oh, we just got to be overly nice to them. These Clickets that are taking over the ship, Shaxs manages to accidentally kill a bunch of them while meditating. He's meditating, and then his body starts to enact the fight scenes he's imagining in his mind, and then inadvertently kills a bunch of these Clickets, and he doesn't know who they are and sees them on the floor, and he says, oh, sorry, buddies. A good moment, but, it's kind of a waste in an otherwise pointless episode. Pointless isn't bad. Pointless is pointless. You should know the difference. Carol Freeman realizes that she can just, compliment them, and she does. I think you guys are doing a good job. You're just doing the best you can. I like your whole vibe. Again, that's the second time that the word vibe has appeared in this season. Although they might be having a little bit of problems with their own vibe behind the scenes since they're being, end of life. This is the final season. Not a very good vibe. So we defeat the Clickets by saying nice things to them. And the Clickets fly away. And thus resolves the overarching plotline of this singular episode. How do we stop the Clickets from stealing the Bughoon? And we were here for the Starfleet ecologist to study the Bughoon. And then he turned out to be a Clicket. So does Starfleet know what happened here? How did this Clicket infiltrate Starfleet enough that they ordered the Cerritos to go do this, and then the ecologist was a secret Clicket? Maybe the ecologist guy was swapped out with a Clicket at some point along the way. A major security breach that should be looked into. And Ransom should be looked into for the things he let the shuttle bay crew get up to. They do eventually realize that one of these people is a Clicket, and it was awesome that they shoved him up against the shuttlecraft. A box landed up his head, and then one of the lower deckers ran up and did a flying kick against the box and knocked him out. It was freaking awesome. But it was sad that it happened, because it happened right under Ransom's watch. Ransom this episode is it was questionable. I'll say that, and I'm definitely writing a little report on him later. Writing in a little formal complaint. Ransom, don't fall asleep while something dangerous is happening. Ransom, you can't save the day by telling them a story. And Ransom, it's dangerous to have a gigantic creature rolling around almost killing everybody. So you didn't do a very good job here. What we're having here is our characters in the upper decks going on their own little adventures. Not unlike the episode Lower Decks from TNG, although this time they don't tie together. None of them are super interesting, and some of them are even bad. But they're all a little bit funny. At the very end of this, as Stevens is walking Carol around, showing her what she has to do every day, or this day, I should say, there's one more thing. You're missing a meeting in the holodeck. You gotta go. And I was hoping to have a nice long call with Admiral Freeman. That's her husband, the Mariner's father, one of these top guys at Starfleet. And she goes into the holodeck, but she opens up the turbo lift door, and who's behind the door? And I just enjoyed this. I don't know why, I just really like this. The turbo lift door opens, and it's him. It's Admiral Freeman. Aww. They arranged it a month ago, and he kind of snuck aboard the ship, just like the Clicket. Except this time, it's to see Captain Freeman, and they had a nice romantic dinner in the holodeck, and they've been planning this out. And she wasn't going to have a nice long subspace communique with Admiral Freeman. She was going to actually see him. And for these characters I don't really know that much about or don't care that much about, they really sold this. And then the honesty of the scene when Admiral Freeman was there, and there wasn't a stupid joke shoved in here. It brought this episode home in a way that almost kind of fixes it for me. It's really strange. Or heartwarming, depending on how you look at it. It's up to you. And so we have the nice romantic ending between our Freemans, our captain and our admiral. And meanwhile, our lower deckers are pondering what has happened without them, because we haven't seen them this whole episode. They're back at the mess hall, I take it. I'm not sure exactly what it's called. And they say, could it be that the upper deckers of our ship have their own adventures, and they're the star of their own story when we're not looking? Again, we've reversed the episode Lower Decks, and we've reversed the show Lower Decks. What are the upper deckers about getting up to when we're not paying attention? This episode could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot more interesting. And like I said, Dr. T'Ana's plot is the funniest at the beginning, worst at the end. Although Dr. T'Ana does, in a rage, end up tearing a Clicket to pieces. This is set to kill, and it doesn't even kill Dr. T'Ana, and then she says, I'm set to kill. Violence equals funny? I don't know. Billups equals funny? Not really. Shaxs equals interesting? Yes. Carol Freeman equals heartwarming? Yes. Take your pick. You can go heartwarming, kind of funny, and then stupid. It's really a mixed bag. But visually, like I said, the Shaxs storyline is fantastic. It'll really stretch what you think you can see in a 2D animated show like this, in terms of how soft the image can be, the lighting, how things move. And it's really cool in that way. Ships-wise, you are seeing the Clicket ship, which is not very nice. It's just kind of random. I'll call that a negative if you want. Thematically, it's as bare bones as it gets. What are we learning here? We battle our inner demons, and then accidentally battle our physical enemies. For Shaxs, that would have been a great thematic hook for a Shaxs episode that's totally in a flashback. That would have been a beautiful episode. We didn't get it. Carol has a busy day. We remember that actually, if we know our interspecies cultural studies, we can actually use that to save the day, and understanding how our enemies think is how we beat them. That's another thing that's in here. Neither of these things are particularly new for Star Trek, although on the Shaxs side, it would have been a lot more interesting to see the episode play out how I said it could have, with Shaxs flashback. I should not review what I want. I shouldn't review what it isn't. We should always review what it is and whether or not it achieved what it was trying to do. So we'll keep that in mind. Musically, I guess I'm going deaf. I didn't really hear much in this episode other than the standard fare of the Cerritos music and the Lower Decks kind of background melody appearing at the beginning and the end. I don't know. You're not getting anything different here in that regard. Plot-wise, it's worse the more you think about it. We have to study these Bughoon. Oh wait, our scientist was a poacher, and then we beat him. Are we going to go pick up the real scientist? The real ecologist, or what have you? Is there a real version of him? Was he ever real? I don't know. The Admiral is here. Can we ask the Admiral what happened? Admiral Freeman, what happened this episode? I don't know. I'm busy right now talking to the captain. Sorry. Bye-bye, later. We're in the holodeck having a romantic dinner. Aw. Okay, I'll forget all about the Clickets. I'll forget about him. Just have a good time. Which is kind of how I felt, if we're being honest. Episode 8, this late into it, and we're not yet in the end game. I'm struggling to see how this works out. We keep bringing up this idea of parallel universes, but what does it mean? Maybe it means nothing. It is fun seeing Boimler slowly grow the beard, though. And you can see every episode that it's getting bigger and bigger. It's a great indicator of the passage of time. And I'll call that fun. With all this stuff out of the way, I'm going to have to go ahead and give this episode a 5 out of 10. It's just barely over the finish line. It's a photo finish for me. It's just barely rewatchable. Just barely. It's I can see a lot of people hating this. I can see people loving it too. But for me, it's just a straight shot down the middle. It just, by a hair, gets over the 5 mark. So it's another middling episode for what seems to be kind of a middling season. This season's affair is kind of a mixed bag. Although it doesn't have extremely low lows, but the highs aren't extremely high either. The highs would be like Farewell to Farms, and what was that other one? Fully Dilated. And they're just, Farewell to Farms couldn't quite even get to a 7 for me. But I'm stingy. But I'm also stingy in the other direction. So I'm fair. I don't give a lot of really, really bad scores or really, really high scores. What was my lowest score? Star Trek Picard Season 2 Hide and Seek? Might have been. At the very end of Star Trek Picard Season 2, I'm handing out some awful scores. And my highest score was actually for a game. I believe I gave Star Trek Resurgence an 8 out of 10. Watch that review, play the game. That's how you get an 8 from me, if you were wondering. You see, you have to know where I stand in order to know what I believe and to know how I review things. You can't just go off one review and say, oh, we hated it, whatever. You have to know how a thing gets a high score from me and how a thing gets a low score, so that you can kind of guess things. Although we don't want to always leave everything up to guesses. We want to be honest, and we want to go into this review not exactly expecting what I'm going to think, but understanding the review I give it after you watch it, which is why I'm giving this episode a 5, after all. I'm Lieutenant Mark, and I'm going to see you for the final 2 episodes when they arrive. Episode 9 next, and then episode 10. I don't know. Are they going to put them together? Who knows? I'm Lieutenant Merrick, and I'm going to see you next time I see you. Signing out. Yeah.